Steven Seagal, there are names that echo through the halls of Hollywood, names that conjure images of power, invincibility, and a kind of mythic presence that seems to defy the ordinary rules of life. For decades, Steven Seagal was one of those names. He was the man who could silence a room with a single glance, the action star whose very walk onto the screen sent a jolt of electricity through audiences around the world. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, Seagal was more than just a movie star. He was a phenomenon, a force of nature, a living legend. His films didn't just entertain, they inspired, they thrilled, and for millions, they defined what it meant to be strong, to be unbreakable, to be a hero. But behind every legend, there is a story that the world rarely sees. Behind the glare of the spotlight, behind the carefully crafted image of indestructibility, there are wounds that never fully heal, battles that are fought in silence, and heartbreaks that no amount of fame or fortune can erase. At 73, Steven Seagal's life is a testament to both the heights of glory and the depths of tragedy. His journey is not just the story of a Hollywood icon, it is the story of a man who has faced unimaginable trials, who has risen and fallen, who has loved and lost, and who, in the twilight of his years, stands as a reminder that even the mightiest can be brought low by the relentless march of time. To understand the tragedy of Steven Seagal, we must first remember the boy he once was. Born in Lansing, Michigan in 1952, Steven was not the picture of strength that the world would one day know. He was a frail child, plagued by asthma and weakness, a boy whose earliest memories were shaped by the struggle to simply draw a breath. His parents, Samuel and Patricia, were working-class people who sacrificed everything to give their son a chance at life. Nights in the Seagal household were often sleepless, filled with the anxious footsteps of a mother listening for the next breath, the next sign that her son would make it through another night. For Steven, childhood was not a time of carefree play, but a daily battle against the limitations of his own body. It was this early struggle that planted the seeds of defiance in Steven's heart. While other children ran and played, he watched from behind a window, longing for the freedom that seemed forever out of reach. The world saw a weak boy, but inside a fire was growing, a determination to prove everyone wrong, to become something more than his circumstances. When his family moved to California in search of a climate that might ease his suffering, Steven found not just relief, but a new beginning. The warm air gave him breath, and with it, the first taste of strength. It was here, in the sun-drenched streets of Fullerton, that Steven began to dream of a life beyond frailty, a life where he could stand tall, unafraid and unbroken. Martial arts became his salvation. In the quiet discipline of the dojo, Steven discovered a world where strength was earned, not given, where respect was measured not by birth but by effort and will. He threw himself into training with a single-minded intensity, pushing his body to its limits, refusing to let weakness define him. The boy who had once struggled to breathe became a young man obsessed with mastery, with the pursuit of a power that could never be taken away. By his early 20s, Steven's journey had taken him across the ocean to Japan, a land where tradition and discipline ruled, and where outsiders were rarely welcomed. In the dojos of Osaka he faced skepticism, suspicion and outright hostility. But Steven endured, he learned, he suffered, and slowly he earned the respect of masters who had once doubted him. It was in Japan that Steven met Miyako Fujitani, the daughter of an esteemed Aikido master. Their union was more than a romance, it was a partnership forged in the fires of discipline and shared ambition. Together, they built a life, a family, and a dojo that would become the foundation of Steven's legend. But even as he found acceptance in a foreign land, the pull of America, of Hollywood, grew stronger. The dream that had begun in a sickly boy's heart was not yet complete. Steven Seagal was destined for something greater, something that would test not just his body but his soul. When Steven Seagal returned to the United States in the early 1980s, he was not the conquering hero that Hollywood would one day celebrate. He was a man caught between worlds, carrying the discipline of Japan and the restless ambition of America. With little more than determination and a lifetime of hard-won skill, he opened an Aikido dojo in West Hollywood, a modest space that echoed with the memories of Osaka and the bruises of countless falls. The dojo was not a gateway to glory. It was a daily struggle for survival. Bills piled up, students came and went, and the future of his dream often hung by a thread. There were nights when Steven swept the floors alone, the silence broken only by the sound of his own doubts. Yet, he refused to surrender. Every empty class, every unpaid invoice, every moment of loneliness was another test, another opportunity to prove that he could endure. Hollywood, at first, was indifferent. Agents dismissed him, executives shook their heads, and doors slammed shut before he could even knock. To most, he was just another martial artist, a foreigner with a strange art and a stranger accent. But Steven Seagal was not a man who accepted defeat. He took on side work as a martial arts coordinator, lending his expertise to films like The Challenge and Never Say Never Again. These were small victories, brief flashes of hope in a landscape of rejection. But they kept the lights on, and more importantly, they kept the dream alive. It was during these lean years that Steven's resolve was truly forged. He watched as stuntmen pretended to do what he had bled to master, as actors mimicked the moves he had spent a lifetime perfecting. The fire inside him burned hotter with every slight, every dismissal. He longed not just to be behind the scenes, but to stand in the spotlight to show the world that the boy who had once gasped for breath could stand unbroken on the greatest stage of all. He trained relentlessly, taught tirelessly, and waited for the moment when destiny would finally see him. That moment arrived in 1988, and it came not as a gentle invitation but as a thunderclap that shook Hollywood to its core. At the age of 36, when most actors were already well into their careers, Steven Seagal made his debut as the star of Above the Law. It was a gamble, an unknown face, a calm voice, a ponytail, and a presence that did not beg for attention but demanded it. The film was a revelation. Seagal didn't just act, he embodied the role, bringing a level of authenticity and intensity that audiences had never seen before. His fights were not flashy displays of choreography, but brutal, efficient demonstrations of real skill. Every move, every throw, every bone-shattering lock carried the weight of a man who had lived the art, not just studied it for the screen. Audiences were captivated. Critics, though divided, could not deny the power of his presence. Overnight, Steven Seagal became Hollywood's newest and most unlikely star. The momentum was unstoppable. Hard to Kill, Marked for Death, and Out for Justice followed in rapid succession, each one carving deeper into his legend. On screen, he was the Avenger who appeared out of nowhere, the unflinching force of nature who ended fights before they even began. His silence spoke louder than words, his stillness more intimidating than 1,000 threats. By 1992, with the release of Under Siege, Steven Seagal had reached the pinnacle of his career. As Casey Ryback, the Navy SEAL turned cook who dismantled terrorists aboard the USS Missouri, he delivered a performance that blended tension, charisma, and ferocity. The film was a worldwide hit, grossing over $150 million and cementing Seagal's status as one of the greatest action stars of his generation. For a brief, blazing moment, Steven Seagal stood shoulder to shoulder with the giants of Hollywood, Stallone, Schwarzenegger, Van Damme. He was not just a star, he was a phenomenon, a man who had redefined what it meant to be an action hero. But even as the world celebrated his triumph, the seeds of tragedy were already taking root. The very qualities that had made him a legend, his intensity, his discipline, his refusal to compromise, would soon become the sources of his greatest pain. For in Hollywood, as in life, glory is fleeting, and the higher the ascent, the more devastating the fall. The mid-1990s marked a turning point in Steven Seagal's life, a moment when the bright lights of fame began to cast longer, darker shadows. The action genre itself was changing. Audiences, once enthralled by muscle-bound heroes and bone-crunching fights, were shifting their gaze to new kinds of stories, new faces, and new definitions of what it meant to be a star. For Seagal, who had built his empire on the foundation of physical dominance and stoic presence, the changing tides of Hollywood were both bewildering and cruel. Yet, at the height of his fame, he made a decision that would alter the course of his career forever. In 1994, Seagal directed On Deadly Ground, a film that was meant to be his magnum opus. A project that would showcase not just his fighting skills, but his passion for environmental causes. He poured his heart into the film, weaving messages about the earth and humanity's responsibility into the fabric of explosions and gunfire. But Hollywood, ever fickle, was not ready for an action hero with a conscience. Critics savaged the film, audiences stayed away, and the box office numbers collapsed. What was meant to be a statement of purpose became a public humiliation. Years later, Seagal would reflect on this moment with a mixture of pain and resignation. Maybe I tried to say too much. Maybe the world wasn't ready to hear it. The sting of rejection was sharper than any blow he had taken in the dojo. Still, he fought on. Under Siege 28, dark territory, and executive decision kept his name alive, but the magic was slipping. The box office, once a guarantee of thunderous success, now offered only uncertainty. The audiences who had once gasped at his every move began to look elsewhere. Seagal, who had once been the embodiment of invincibility, now found himself fighting battles he could not win. The fall was slow, but it was relentless. By the late 1990s, his films were no longer premiering in theaters. They were going straight to DVD, released quietly without fanfare or applause. For a man who had once commanded hundreds of millions at the box office, it was not just a career downturn, it was a kind of erasure, a slow fading from the public consciousness. The pain of this decline was not just professional, it was deeply personal. For Seagal, whose identity had been forged in the fires of adversity, the loss of relevance was a wound that cut to the core. He once confessed, "I've known pain since I was a boy, but nothing hurt like watching everything I built slip away. It's like drowning, and the world just keeps moving without you." The sensation was hauntingly familiar. The boy who had once struggled to draw breath was now a man gasping for recognition, for purpose, for a place in a world that seemed to have moved on. But even as the world turned away, Seagal searched for new ways to express himself, to find meaning beyond the silver screen. Music, always a quiet companion in his life, became a refuge. In 2005 he released Songs from the Crystal Cave, followed by Mojo Priest a year later. These albums were not the swaggering anthems of an action hero, but the raw, yearning expressions of a man stripped of glory, searching for redemption in blues chords and honest lyrics. On stage, guitar in hand, Seagal was no longer Casey Ryback or the silent avenger. He was simply Steven, the dreamer, the wounded soul. But the world, ever merciless, was not kind. Critics mocked his voice, dismissed his lyrics, and late-night hosts turned his efforts into punchlines. What was meant as a rebirth became another public humiliation. Yet he played on. In small venues in distant cities, to audiences who sometimes clapped politely and sometimes turned away, Seagal kept moving forward. He had been underestimated before, and every time, he had risen. "You can take away the lights, the money, the fame. But as long as I can pick up a guitar, I'm still alive, I'm still me." These words, spoken in a rare moment of vulnerability, revealed the truth of his journey. For Steven Seagal's survival was not about applause or adulation. It was about refusing to let silence write the final note of his story. But the heartbreak of Steven Seagal's story is not measured only in lost fame or fading applause. It is written in the quiet collapse of the world he built outside the spotlight, the world of family, love, and home. For all his on-screen invincibility, Seagal's personal life was marked by a series of fractures that no amount of strength could mend. His first marriage, to Miyako Fujitani, had been a partnership forged in the crucible of discipline and shared ambition. Together they built a family in Japan, raising 2 children in the echoing halls of the dojo. But as Seagal's reputation grew and the pull of Hollywood became irresistible, distance crept in. What began as days apart turned into months, then years. Letters and phone calls could not bridge the growing silence. Miyako was left to raise their children alone while Steven chased dreams across the ocean. The cost of ambition was the slow unraveling of a marriage, the hollow ache of absence that no success could fill. When Seagal returned to America, he sought solace in a new relationship, marrying actress Adrienne LaRussa. But the wounds of the past had not healed, and the marriage dissolved almost as quickly as it began. There were no children to bind them, no shared years of hardship to forge resilience. Instead, there was only the quiet truth that love born from desperation cannot survive the storms of a wounded soul. Seagal himself would later admit, "I was searching for peace in the wrong places, and when you do that, nothing lasts." The words are simple, but they carry the unbearable weight of regret, the kind that lingers long after the applause fades. It was his third marriage, to Kelly LeBrock, that seemed for a time to offer redemption. LeBrock, a luminous actress and model, brought a new kind of light into Seagal's life. Their union was the stuff of Hollywood legend, a golden couple admired and envied, their every move chronicled by the press. Together they had 3 children, and for a while, their home was filled with laughter and the innocent joy of family. But even fairy tales cast shadows. The relentless demands of Seagal's career kept him away for weeks, sometimes months, while rumors and whispers of infidelity began to erode the foundation of trust. LeBrock, left to shoulder the burdens of motherhood alone, found herself increasingly isolated. The laughter of their early years turned brittle, echoing in hallways that once rang with joy. By the mid-1990s, the fractures in their marriage had become canyons. The collapse of Seagal's professional empire coincided with the collapse of his family. Their divorce was anything but quiet. Custody battles ended with LeBrock taking full responsibility for their 3 children, while Seagal faced the ache of watching them grow up largely from a distance. Financial disputes forced the division of assets, reducing years of shared dreams to cold negotiations. And all the while, tabloids feasted on every detail, turning heartbreak into headlines, transforming private grief into public spectacle. For the children, it was not simply the unraveling of a marriage, it was the dismantling of the only sanctuary they had ever known. For Seagal, the pain was twofold. He had lost not just a wife, but the chance to be present for his children, to witness their milestones, to offer the steady presence that had once been denied to him as a child. Looking back, he would admit, "Fame took me everywhere except where I truly needed to be. Home." The words are a quiet confession, a recognition that no amount of success can replace the fragile bonds of family. The story of Steven Seagal and Kelly LeBrock is not just gossip, it is a cautionary tale. A mirror for anyone who believes that triumph in the world can shield them from the battles within their own home. Yet even in the aftermath of heartbreak, Seagal searched for peace. In the early 2000s he found a quiet haven with Erdenechia Batsuk, a graceful Mongolian dancer who saw not the fading legend, but the man beneath. Their bond grew slowly, far from the frenzy of Hollywood, and together they welcomed a son. For a man who had lived in a whirlwind, this was a gift of stillness, a chance to cradle hope and believe, if only for a moment, that home could last. Yet even as Steven Seagal found a measure of peace in the quiet rhythms of family life, the shadows of his past lingered, refusing to be banished by new beginnings. The years had carved deep lines into his face and left invisible scars on his spirit. For all the serenity he found with Erdenechia and their son, there remained the ache of missed birthdays, the silence of empty chairs at family gatherings, and the knowledge that his legacy as a father was as complicated as his legacy on screen. 7 children born across decades and continents, each carried their own memories of love and absence, of a father who was both a legend and a mystery. For Seagal, the joy of holding his youngest was always tempered by the regret of what had already slipped away. The world outside his home was no less unforgiving. As the 2000s unfolded, Seagal's attempts to reinvent himself met with mixed results. He ventured into business, launching products that bore his name. Energy drinks, fragrances, martial arts collectibles, each one an effort to capture a new audience to keep his empire alive. But the marketplace, like Hollywood, could be merciless. Ventures failed, products vanished from shelves, and what was meant to be a resurrection often became another reminder of how far he had fallen. The harshest blow came not from a failed business, but from the collapse of a dream home in Tennessee. Once valued at nearly $40 million, the estate sat unsold for years before being let go for a fraction of its worth. For Seagal, it was more than a financial loss. It was a wound to the spirit, a symbol of how even the grandest empires can crumble. But perhaps the most relentless adversary Seagal faced was not the critics, the marketplace, or even the passage of time. It was his own body. The very instrument that had made him extraordinary, that had built his legend, became in the end his hardest opponent. Decades of martial arts, stunts, and on-screen battles had taken their toll. Wrists, shoulders, hips, and knees bore the memory of every fall, every collision, every fight scene that demanded more than the body was meant to give. Crew members recalled the bruises he iced without complaint, the sprains he wrapped in silence, the stubborn pride that refused to yield even as the pain grew sharper with each passing year. By his 50s, the toll was undeniable. The lean, fluid quickness of his youth had given way to a heavier frame, the graceful circles of Aikido narrowed into careful arcs. Directors adjusted their cameras, stunt teams carried more of the weight, and the man who once crossed a room like a storm now moved with measured deliberation. For audiences who had memorized the snap of his wrists and the suddenness of his throws, there was a quiet sorrow in the recognition that time spares no one, not even the indestructible. Behind closed doors the cost was even harsher. Heat pads before dawn, stretches in the dark, cautious steps down hallways, the wince he tried to hide when lowering into a chair. His joints spoke in their own unignorable language, muscles remembered every impact, and nights grew shorter as mornings demanded more effort just to begin. The mirror, once a source of pride, became a reminder of loss, not vanity but the loss of certainty, the knowledge that his body would answer when called. "Every step I take now, I remember the battles that put me here," he once admitted, a rare moment of candor that revealed the humility of a man who had learned that the body keeps its own merciless ledger. In the quiet of his later years, Steven Seagal's life has become a study in contrasts. A man once defined by thunderous action, now seeking solace in silence, a legend of the screen now living in the shadows of memory. His Arizona estate, fortified and secluded, stands as both a fortress and a sanctuary. Bulletproof glass, towering samurai statues, and an infinity pool that seems to pour into the endless desert sky. All these are remnants of a life lived at full throttle, now repurposed as defenses against a world that once adored him and now mostly looks away. To outsiders it is a castle. To those who know his story, it is a bastion built after storms, a place where a man who once commanded the screen now seeks only peace. Yet even in this retreat the echoes of the past are never far. The garage filled with vintage cars, a 1973 Mustang, a Chevrolet Caprice, a rare Jaguar XJ2D, serves as a museum of rebellion and speed, reminders of a time when Seagal's name was synonymous with power and presence. But these machines, like their owner, have slowed. They are no longer symbols of conquest, but relics of a vanished era, their engines idling in the hush of the desert. Financially, Seagal's fortunes have dwindled. Once among the highest-paid action stars in the world, his estimated net worth now hovers around $14 million. A comfortable sum but a fraction of what his peers amassed. The mansions, the cars, the trappings of success remain, but the empire is smaller, the world quieter. For a man who once stood at the center of the storm, the silence can be deafening. But it is in this silence that Seagal has found a new kind of strength. Meditation steadies his mornings, light martial arts practice keeps the old rhythm alive, and discipline in food sustains what strength remains. The rituals are gentler now, the movements slower, but the spirit endures. He steps onto film sets rarely, choosing smaller projects when he does, preferring instead the unseen joys of family dinners, simple training, an evening spent not in the noise of applause, but in the comfort of belonging. Still, the ache of loss is never far. The world will not roar his name again, the empire built with fists and presence has dissolved into memory, and the face in the mirror is lined with the passage of time. Yet, to look only at what was lost is to miss the deeper truth. Steven Seagal remains one of the few action stars whose presence carved a path all its own. His stillness, his sudden ferocity, his distinct style, they left a fingerprint on cinema that endures long after the spotlight faded. For those who grew old alongside him, Seagal's journey is a mirror. If your knees forecast the weather, if the stairs grow steeper, if mornings ask more of you than they once did, you know this story. The tale of Steven Seagal's health is no longer the myth of an indestructible hero, but the quieter, braver tale of a man learning to live with what time has taken and to honor what remains. Breath, presence, work, family, and a will that endures, these are the treasures that outlast fame. In the end, the body tallies every cost, but the soul decides how to spend what is left. And there, even as the years press down, Steven Seagal still stands. Slower, yes. Heavier, yes. But enduring. Proof that sometimes the purest kind of strength is simply to keep moving, one deliberate step at a time. For his family, Seagal is no longer the action hero of the big screen, but a father and grandfather, a man who has learned to cherish the fragile, fleeting moments that cannot be reclaimed. For his fans, he remains a symbol of resilience. A reminder that even the mightiest can fall, but that true courage is found in rising again, in facing each day with whatever strength remains.